So just a little bit of housekeeping before we go. I may go on and off screen a little bit, but I'm going to be hosting the event throughout. The session is being recorded, as you'll notice. So please remain on mute and switch off your camera if you do not wish to be recorded. We'll stop the recording at the Q&A, so hold off on your questions till then, but do put your questions in the chat and my colleague Jo will be taking a note of them, and we'll bring them up at the end. If we run out of time, we'll just follow up any unanswered questions at the end. We'll be sharing the recording and the presentation, so kind of just relax and just listen rather than taking too many notes. We deliberately made it a meeting rather than in a webinar, because as delivery partners, we kind of want you in the room. We want it to be a really, a shared session rather than us just presenting to you guys. We've got some backups in place, and we'll just hope you excuse, any bits and pieces in the way these things can happen. And, we hope you enjoy the session. So I just want people to introduce themselves. So have we got Deborah here yet? No, she's not here. That's okay. So what about Jenny? Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Louise. So my name's Jenny Popkins. I'm a consultant, facilitator, trainer and coach. I've worked in the charity sector for about 20 years altogether. And for the last 8 of these, I've been supporting organisations with different aspects of planning and capacity building. So especially strategy and theory of change development, leading on to planning for monitoring and evaluation, and also improving the effectiveness of governance. So for 4.5 years, I worked at NCVO as a consultant, and just before Christmas, I left NCVO and went freelance, but I'm still very much involved as one of their associate pool. So a bit later this morning, I'm going to deliver kind of a crash course in good monitoring and evaluation practice based on the kind of training that we deliver to the sector. And for those of you who don't know much about NCVO, we are the largest sector support organisation based in England, and we work with all kinds of voluntary organisations. So that's mainly charities, but anything from a really local charity, a really small one, right up to sort of global and big international household names. So as well as providing things like resources and training and consultancy, we're also a voice for the sector. And we were very much leading on the campaign to govern to get resources for the sector during COVID, and more recently during the cost of living crisis. We're a membership organisation, so do check out if your organisation is a member, because when you're a member organisation, everyone in the organisation, both staff and volunteers and trustees, can benefit from those additional benefits which we provide. And if you're not a member, you might want to check us out and see whether membership is something for you. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Jenny. Jo, could you just introduce yourself briefly, please?
Hi, everyone. Lovely to see so many of you join us. So I'm Jo. I know some of you, I haven't really met yet. My focus is, I'm part of the impact team, but my focus is really on the due diligence and payment side of things. But I also just provide other support to the impact team. And then I lead the staff-led equality, diversity and inclusion group as well. So hello and welcome, everybody. Great to have you all with us.
Thank you. Hamim?
Yes. Hi, this is Hamim Islam. I'm an impact associate in the impact team of the Seafarers charity. I usually oversee the grant applications, as well as I'm extensively involved in the monitoring and evaluation on behalf of the Seafarers charity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say a little bit about my background. I've also met some of you, but some new faces here too. I'm obviously from New Zealand, but my parents are from the northeast. I come from a working class background up north. I've worked in fundraising and grant making for 20 years, so I'm very sympathetic to how hard it is to raise funds for your cause. So I have a deep understanding of that as well. I have an MBA in philanthropy, But the bit I'm most kind of proud of relating to this work is I've worked in the fishing industry in the past, and I'm also a boat owner, so I can sympathise with concerns around bilges and engine maintenance and all of that. So lastly, I'd just like to introduce Deborah, and you just swing straight into your session, Deborah, once you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Hello, my name is Deborah Lade, and I'm Chief Executive of the Seafarers charity. And I've been with the charity for 12 years, and I'm very invested in the effectiveness of our grant making, having started as grants manager, moved up to grants director, and then a year and a half ago, being privileged to be appointed as Chief Executive of the charity. Now, all of you here that will know that our funding supports an incredibly diverse range of partner organisations in delivering vital targeted help where it's needed most. We fund for many of you the essential crop costs, which create a strong network of maritime welfare services across the global sector, and crucially tackles seafarers' hardship in all its form, whether that's on sea or on land. So taking us back to why we're here as a charity, quite simply, our vision is a world where seafarers and their families are free from need and disadvantage. Now, everything we're here for is around that vision. And you online are a massive part of this. And this is why we're holding this webinar, and this is why we want your involvement. And, you are crucial to everything we do, obviously. Our mission is quite simply to tackle the disadvantages of seafaring life by leading collaboration, funding, and advocacy to improve seafarers' lives. And so to improve both our vision and our mission, we are ambitious for seafarers. And by that, I mean we are, of course, working in partnership with all of those that we fund and don't fund, of course, and non-sector influencers and sector influencers to make sure that we look to alleviate these difficult issues that are commonly faced by seafarers, whether working, retired, wherever they're from, UK, or wherever their work takes them. So, of course, like you, our ambitions are lofty for seafarers. Where can we be brave? Where and how can we tackle the systemic issues in a maritime career that have far too long been endured by many? How might we counteract or extinguish the roots of difficulties for seafarers? How can we learn from the data and insights that you have, learning from you all what you do so well and what has been tried and tested, what has failed perhaps in the past, but what might work now? Looking at working with you to search for other solutions as well. So always looking to long-term alleviation of the needs of seafarers and their families. That's our ambitions for seafarers. We believe that seafarers need us to be ambitious. We really do. Because the higher you aim, the further you get. And also, of course, it is our duty as a grant funder that injects over 2.4 million annually sterling to ensure that we use well our funds and resources towards our charitable purposes. And we're here now, over 100 years later, as we've successfully fundraised, realising the enormity of our task, and to ensure that we can continue to fund the incredible work you will do. But of course, to successfully fundraise, which is one of our two foundational pillars, we do need to work with you on the effectiveness of our grant making. And of course, this leads directly to our monitoring and evaluation work, the reason for this webinar. Our fundraising efforts see us both reaching out to interested individuals and partnering directly with industry and other bodies. We're developing long-term relationships with industry and corporate funders, as well as, of course, of trusts and foundations like many of you do. And this work and this fundraising helps us to drive change from within, increasing our influence and reach as a charity. And these partnerships also provide crucial insight and knowledge to inform our strategic direction. I think you know well our strategic outcomes. but really, essentially, our focus remains on listening, collaborating, and seeking solutions with you, our partners, in order to deliver the 5 long-term outcomes for seafarers. So really, I think in terms of next steps, we're here to talk about how you can work with us to talk to influence and impact on what we're all doing together for seafarers. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to the rest of the webinar.
Thanks, Deborah. Let me just bring us up again. So I just wanted to cover off on, I'm just going to see if I can find us all. I just wanted to cover off some grant making highlights from the last 12 months. So just a few top line stats for you. We've had, in 2023, we gave out 68 grant awards, totaling 2.4 million, just over that, to 51 organisations. And some of you may have heard that we are, making some changes to the direction of travel of our grant making, and but we really want to, make it clear that this is just incremental. So, we are looking further afield for opportunities, but, in fact, when we look at the stats, 96% of our grants were awarded to charities registered in the UK last year. So that's still very much along the lines of what we normally do. 56% of the grant supported services just for UK seafarers, while 44% supported services for all seafarers. So again, still doing a lot in the UK. Around the question of core costs, 78% of our grants last year went to core costs for organisations. So there still remains a huge percentage of our focus, with just 22% going to bespoke projects. 84% was paid for, welfare services in general, and 16% is sort of moving to a focus on preventative services to tackle some of these problems at root cause, just as Deborah remarked. And if we look into the 5 strategic outcomes and look at the breakdown, better working lives at sea got 36% of the awards, improved health and wellbeing 29%, and enhanced financial resilience 26%. So that makes up the bulk of our work, safer working lives at sea and increased social justice at 4% and 5% respectively. So I'm just going to hand over now to Hamim and see if I can find his photo again while he speaks. And he's going to talk a little bit about our monitoring and evaluation processes that you'll be familiar with to date.
Hi, thank you, Louise. So I will be talking about the current monitoring and evaluation practice that we are having for the recent years. So currently in our monitoring and evaluation practice, we are giving single set of questionnaire to all our delivery partners. This is actually a one-size-fits-all approach. Usually we send the evaluation questionnaires after 14 months of the award. We send them annually, but there are indeed some exceptions with some of the multi-year grant commitments we have, where we send them sometimes 2 times of the year we do the review. So basically, as you all the delivery partners are involved with our monitoring and evaluation practice, we send the evaluation questionnaires through a platform called SurveyMonkey. And also we give our delivery partners the wonderful opportunities to share their success stories, their case studies with us, so that qualitatively we can see how our grants are making impacts. Lastly, but not the least, from the last year, we started a confidential funder feedback survey. We send this confidential form to all our delivery partners so that they can actually all the delivery partners can say how we are doing, the Seafarer charity is doing as a funder, and the areas where we can improve ourselves. So this is currently the current monitoring evaluation on process that we do, and hopefully my next speaker will be talking about what changes we will be bringing to the next phase of the monitoring and evaluation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hamim. So, right now I'm going to hand it over to Jenny again. She's got her own presentation, so she can now share that. And she's going to go for about half an hour, going to talk into the guts of monitoring and evaluation, which is a whole, you know, an area of specialism. I find it fascinating and inspiring, but I think sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming if it's the first time you've seen the detail. So, you know, we're taking a very sort of measured approach to bringing this in. So this is the full picture, or, you know, an overview of what it can look like, and we're on this journey together with you. So thank you, Jenny.
Thanks very much, Louise. So as Louise said, you know, monitoring and evaluation, it's a really big field. There is so much to learn. So I'm going to start the presentation by just giving an overview of what monitoring evaluation is, why it's important, some of how we recommend that organisations prepare for it, and just touch a little bit on data collection. And then I'll talk a little bit about the work we did with the Seafarers charity, which started way back when it was Seafarers UK, and how the Seafarers charity has got to the point it is. And then I'll be handing back to Louise to talk about how they're implementing some of the work that we helped them think through during that period. So, just to start with, let's do a little bit of jargon busting. So when we talk about monitoring and evaluation, what are we talking about? Well, monitoring we define as routine, systematic collection of information for the purpose of checking your progress against your plans. And this is usually at a project progress, but we think about it as a whole organisation perspective as well. So it's kind of the technical aspects. But then evaluation is that interpretative piece. So it's a reflective process. So we're using that monitoring and data and other information available to us to make judgments about how we're doing in terms of what we set out to do. So why is monitoring and evaluation important? Well, accountability is one aspect. We are set up as charities to make a difference in the world, and we receive funding from various sources, public funding. So we have a level of accountability to our different stakeholder groups, to our users, to our other stakeholders, like maybe government, local authorities, our charity partners. We also have accountability to our funders who enable us to undertake this work, and ultimately to the Charity Commission as well, where we register, saying what our public benefit is going to be. But it's not just about that accountability. It's also about setting up internal processes of learning and development. It's a way of supporting our organisation with planning and thinking about our future strategy. So gaining those perspectives to improve our performance and show our effectiveness. And then it helps us with our communications. We need to share and celebrate our success, both internally and externally, to engage with our various stakeholders and show what we do. So it's very easy to think about monitoring and evaluation as proving what we're doing, but really we need to think about it in terms of improving our work as well and having that as our key focus. So we think about it in terms of a learning cycle. And it's really important here to start with our purpose. What are the issues that our users, our beneficiaries are experiencing? And during working with the Seafarers charity and also some work I did with other seafarer charities, I heard lots about those issues, about people not getting paid, about being hijacked, about loneliness, lack of contact with family. So there are so many different issues which seafarers face, which I'm sure you know a lot about. But as an organisation, we can only tackle some of those aspects. We have to choose what we're going to do with our resources within that bigger picture of provision. So we need to be clear about what difference we are going to make in the face of these many problems which seafarers face. And then we have to make a decision. What are we going to deliver in order to make this difference to the lives of seafarers? And this is where monitoring and evaluation then comes in, because once we've got clear about the difference we want to make and what we're going to deliver, we can then start tracking our progress and set up that learning cycle so that we can improve what we do in the future. So how do we plan for monitoring and evaluation? Well, it's not compulsory to have a theory of change, but very often at NCVO, when we start supporting organisations with their monitoring and evaluation, this is the first step that we take. And once this initial work is done, it can help to streamline systems and actually reduce the overall volume of monitoring and evaluation required. That's because it helps us set up a considered, aligned approach, right from our strategy all the way down to our projects. So even if you don't decide to create a theory of change, you will need to consider what some of the aspects are in order to start populating a monitoring and evaluation framework. So what do I mean by theory of change? Well, there's no single definition, but at NCVO, we say it's a description of why a particular way of working will be effective, showing how change happens through short to medium and long term to achieve the intended impact. And we know instinctively from our lives that change is usually a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's something that happens in a series of stages. So let's pick apart those key ideas. And there are some essential ingredients of theory of change. And these are the four. So on the right here, we have the impact. Impact is a word which is used generally in the sector to talk about the difference we make. And certainly a lot of funders use it in that way. But when we're talking about theory of change, we use it in quite a particular way. We talk about it being the big picture change, that really long-term change which we contribute to as an organisation. So it's change that we hope for rather than what we see on a day-to-day basis. And we say it's something we contribute to because other organisations are also trying to create that big picture change. In the room today, we've got lots of delivery partners, and I expect lots of you are trying to work towards long-term outcomes for seafarers and also that big picture change of a better world. On the left here, we've got activities. So these are the things which you do. These are the things which you deliver in order to make a difference to your client group. So these can be your frontline services. They could be things like products, maybe resource sheets that you have on your website or some research that you publish, and also activities like campaigning and advocacy and other kinds of influence. And then in the middle, we have this defining feature of theory of change. So these are the outcomes. These are the steps of change, that journey that are created from our activities and lead up to this big picture contribution to impact. So this is real world changes resulting from what we deliver. And then another key feature of theory of change are our assumptions. So here we think about what are the things we need in place for success in terms of change, creating the change that we want to. And it's sometimes helpful to think about those in terms of enablers and risks. So this is what a theory of change might look like. This is quite a straightforward one. It might be for a very small organisation or for a project within a larger organisation. So this theory of change is talking about some work with young people who are not in education, employment and training. And at the top here, we see this big picture change, which this organisation wants to contribute to. It wants higher youth employment in its area. This organisation has identified that the employment rate for young people within its area is lower than the national average, and it wants to seek to address that. And one of the things it's doing is helping young people. So it's delivering these activities we see here in the blue boxes. So we've got the skills workshops for them. It's delivering work placements in partnership with employers and also setting up a peer mentoring scheme. And then in the middle here, we have this journey of outcomes. So in the short term for these young people through its activities, it wants young people to develop better skills. It wants those young people to have improved experience of work. And then in the more medium term, through this, its young people will understand more about how to behave. For example, the importance of turning up on time, respecting clients and colleagues, to have greater confidence, maybe in themselves or that they can get and hold down a job, and to understand more about the job market. And then in the long term, it wants these young people to become more work ready. So here we see these outcomes, these succinct statements of the change that we want to create for this particular client group. And I'm not going to dig into assumptions today, but there are lots of assumptions on this theory of change, and you might spot some of them. For example, that if you send young people on work placements, they'll have an improved experience of work. So that really makes you think about how you set up your partnerships and train your partners and set expectations. There's also a contextual assumption here that if you make young people more work ready, it will actually address youth employment. There are so many other contextual factors which might affect that. But sometimes assumptions appear in your monitoring and evaluation framework, and they're really good for making you test your thinking about how successful your project or programme may be at the planning stage and mitigating against potential areas of weakness. So why at NCVO do my colleagues and I spend so much time developing theories of change with our clients? Well, I do it for strategy work as well as monitoring and evaluation. And that's because when you create a theory of change, it makes really explicit how you are going to make a difference in line with your charitable purpose, which you're registered to create. And taking people through this process, through the discussion, make sure that everyone is in alignment about your direction. Everyone has this shared sense of purpose and what the story is behind your work and what you're trying to achieve. When you're really clear about what difference you want to make in the world because you define these outcomes, you can then ask a really important strategic question. You can say, if that is the difference we want to make, what should we deliver in order to be most effective to make that difference? Where should we focus putting our resources? And that reflection will probably lead you to continue much of what you're already doing. But it might cause you to stop some things which are not so aligned with the difference you want to make. And it might make you want to start new things, try those out because you think they will be more effective. And then once you're really clear about what difference you want to make, about what you're going to deliver, you can set about evaluating your success for those. And then once that data starts coming in, you can learn from that and set up these cycles of continuous improvement. So improving what you're delivering, but also continuing to ask that strategic question about how can we dedicate our resources most effectively. So let's think about data collection.
Yeah, I'm fine. Don't want to call. Thanks very much.
So we don't have to collect information about everything on our theory of change. Some people suddenly get a little bit overwhelmed and say, how are we going to measure all of this? Well, you don't have to measure everything. You need to prioritize. We all have limited resources, so we have to focus our energies on monitoring and evaluating what is most important. So What we recommend at NCVO is normally, if you have a theory of change, you focus on, say, monitoring and evaluating against 5 of your outcomes. And then we collect data around different aspects of those outcomes. So that's already quite a lot of data to collect. But it's better to start small and build up your experience and get your systems working rather than trying to do much. So when you're focusing on which outcomes to collect data around, it's really good to think about which of them are most valuable from those different perspectives, from the perspective of the people who use our services, from the perspective of our organisation and our strategy and ambition, and the perspective of what our funders are most interested in. So when you're prioritising for measurement, and this is an example of a mental health project which was working with older people, charity supporting older people. It's tempting to think of that big picture change, but the problem is that that long-term change for most organisations is really hard to measure. For example, we might want to create a long-term difference for them, but we might lose contact with those people. And also that big picture change is something that we're contributing to. So actually trying to define our contribution to it is really difficult. It's possible, but it takes a lot of resources. So it's really out of scope for the day-to-day evaluation for most organisations. But what we can measure against are our outcomes. And here for this organisation, it's selected 3 outcomes to focus its measurement for this particular project, around the level of isolation for older people, around their understanding of mental health issues, and whether they're actually taking up the local services. And then it's clearly defined its activities that it wants to measure and evaluate against as well. So to create a strong foundation for your monitoring and evaluation and make sure everyone's on the same page about it, it's good to have some kind of framework. And this is a typical example of the kind of frameworks that we use with our clients. So here we would list the chosen outcomes that the client has selected for evaluation. And then we would define some outcome indicators. And I'll dig into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. We'd then document what information collection methods the client has chosen. And we'd make specific who is responsible for collecting that data and also the kinds of timescales it's collected on. And then another really good thing to do is be explicit on how that information will be used and reported on. Because if people don't understand the value of the data they're collecting, they will feel it's less valuable activity for them. And also you might realise through doing that some of your data isn't quite as valuable as you thought it might be. And going through this process can sometimes help you cut back on some of the data collection, which is not most effective. And then, as well as defining that for our outcomes, we can define this kind of framework for our activities as well. So I used here the word indicators. So we defined, didn't we, our outcomes, the difference we want to make in the world and our activities, what we're doing to make that difference. But here, we're trying to get different perspectives on whether we are achieving those things in the way that we had planned. So indicators are specific pieces of information that you collect which are telling you what you have achieved. And our outcome indicators tell you if you've made the difference that you said that you wanted to. And your activity indicators tell you about what has been delivered. So when we think about this again in a little bit more detail, we can think about different types of data that we can collect. So we said earlier, the impact data is usually out of scope for most organisations. It's just a bit too complex, that big picture, long-term stuff. But we can collect outcome data. And this is really understanding our effectiveness, whether we're seeing among our stakeholder groups, our clients, the kind of changes that we want to see in the world. And then when we think about our activities, we can collect user data, engagement data, and feedback data. So our user and engagement data is about understanding the reach of our activities. So thinking about who turned up, what kind of seafarer, what geography they are in, for example, maybe their age groups, maybe their families of seafarers and not seafarers themselves. And when we think about engagement data, we're thinking about how often we run an activity, how many people came to it, and maybe the channels which people engage with us through. So some of our work might be face-to-face, but some of it might be delivered remotely online. And then that feedback data is really thinking about the quality of what we deliver. So what are participants saying about our projects and programs? Are they satisfied with them? Would they recommend them to other seafarers? So when we think about collecting data around our outcomes, as I said earlier, we normally choose a selection of outcomes, and then we want to identify some different perspectives that will tell us whether the change we want to happen has actually happened. And these are our indicators. So whereas our outcomes are talking about change, our indicators are normally expressed in this neutral kind of language. So this organisation supporting older people with mental health issues identified potential outcome indicators as whether or not the older people they were working with could identify symptoms of mental health problems, whether or not they could match those symptoms with different mental health conditions. In understanding whether they had reduced isolation among older people, they thought suitable indicators might be the level of feelings of loneliness and isolation their clients were reporting, maybe the number of friends that those people had, and just what older people were talking about or were saying about their social lives. All these different things could indicate whether they were reducing isolation for them. So what do we need to bear in mind in terms of setting good indicators? Well, every organisation is different, the clients are different, and you're working in a different context. So there's no one size fits all. So you have to think about your context and the relevance to your particular service users. But it's always really good to think about creating multiple indicators for a particular outcome. So here you're creating different perspectives on change. And a good practice, again, is to collect numerical and narrative data, so quantitative and qualitative data. And that helps us get both objective and those subjective measures into our monitoring and evaluation practice. So why is that helpful? Well, quantitative data, as we said, it's numerical data. So it can tell us about the prevalence of something, the extent to which we've achieved something. An example of that might be 85% of older people felt more able to cope as a result of attending our support groups. So here we've got a firm measure of how many people said a particular change occurred for them. But when we collect qualitative data, so this is the kind of narrative data, we can explore a bit more about what has happened, what's going on behind the scenes. So on our surveys, our participants said that this was because they felt more confident in dealing with situations they hadn't faced because they heard about the experiences of other people in the group. But here we also learn about that 15% who didn't experience a greater ability to cope and more confidence. And they're telling us it was because they felt overwhelmed by the range of issues discussed. So here it helps us learn and think about how we organise those activities in future to increase the number of people whose levels of confidence and feelings of being able to cope can increase. So if we can, it's always useful to collect both types of data. The next two slides, I'm not going to go into in any depth, but I'll just flag up what they're about. So when you're creating outcome indicators, as I said, we usually start with creating these neutral statements, and these are just typical sentence starters. So if you're thinking about developing a monitoring and evaluation framework, these might help you in identifying and articulating your different qualitative and quantitative outcome indicator statements. And then there's another slide here, because I recognise that a lot of you may not or may not only be engaging in frontline service delivery. Some of you may also be doing some aspects of campaigning and advocacy and influencing. So in learning whether we've, influenced those decision makers and whether people are more engaged with us, we need quite different kinds of outcome indicators. So here are a few suggestions here for you to look at. And underneath, if you want to explore in more depth how you can improve, how you monitor and evaluate that kind of influencing work, there's a document there that you can link through to and find out a bit more. So we've explored those outcome indicators a little. And then we said we also want to create indicators around our activities. And we're thinking here about user engagement and feedback data. So this organisation delivering these services said that it wanted to evaluate around its social outings, its outreach events and signposting. So these were some of the activity indicators that it thought about. So documenting the number of events it held, the type of events, the number of people who came and who those people were, what their profile is, and also finding about their level of user satisfaction. So if you're quite new to monitoring and evaluation, I hope that some of these examples will help you with thinking about planning your own monitoring and evaluation framework. But once we've actually got an idea of the kind of data we want to collect, we actually have to go out and do that. So we have to create some tools. And again, there's no set approach to this. Every organisation is different. It's working in a different context with different kind of client groups which have different needs and different ways of engaging with us. So we need to think about what are the most appropriate types of data collection tools for us. We need to think about the kind of information we've decided we want to collect. We need to think about the capabilities and capacity of our staff teams and also our service users who we need to engage with these tools and collect data from. So we need to think about appropriateness for our audiences and also how easy it's going to be to use the data and analyse it when it comes back to us. So commonly used data collection tools, we talked about the quantitative and the qualitative aspects. So quantitative, it's very common to have surveys. SurveyMonkey is a very popular tool for this, or, if you're running events, creating some kind of feedback form at the end. Distance travel tools are very useful as well. So for example, if you're supporting people with their finances over a period of time or with their mental well-being, a distance travel tool is something that you use over that period of time. So you might take a baseline measure right at the beginning of your engagement with that person. And then you might take another measure 3 months on and say 6 months on, and again, take a final measure if you can when they are about to leave your services. And this helps you understand how much difference you have made to that individual over a period of time. And obviously, you can collate that information to get an overall picture for your client group. Some of these tools are paid for. For example, the Outcome Star is quite a well-known one. This is set up online and you buy into it. And it does lots and lots of work for you, collecting information about different aspects of that person's journey. But you don't have to buy into these tools all the time. You can create a bespoke tool for yourself based on these principles of measuring against these particular indicators and taking that distance travelled approach over that period of time using a baseline. There are various trackers that you can use. You can track how many times people download things from your website, for example. And then particularly if you're going to get into that longer term data analysis, you can start thinking about published data from other places as well, maybe national and local data sets, for example. Or if you're engaging in advocacy and influencing, you might be interested in media coverage to see if the kinds of issues which you're raising with your stakeholders are actually appearing in the media. And then for qualitative, you might want to interview some of your service users or set up some focus groups with them. It's also legitimate to observe people and use that as a way so that you don't always have to directly ask them, but you can take an observation of how things have changed for them over time as a staff member working with them. Many organisations will have case notes where they're logging, perhaps in tandem with these distance travelled tools, what's happening for that person at this particular time on their journey. And then, you know, we're never quite sure when we're going to get feedback from people sometimes. So you can also set up a system to collect that feedback, make that easy for your staff and volunteers, and then collate that at a particular point. There are various creative methods too, and these are sometimes used with older people and young people and families, for example. So if you want to try something different, you might want to look into some of those creative methods. Obviously, you're working in very different contexts, and some of you will have some face-to-face contacts with seafarers, and some of you will be working much more remotely. And one of the things that happened over COVID, where we were all forced into much more remote working, was a lot more online data collection tools became available. So there's quite a proliferation out there. If you're looking to solve data collection problems, then do have a hunt around and ask your peers, because there's quite a lot of digital collection tools out there now, which weren't available a few years ago. So it may feel overwhelming sometimes to collect data, but we said earlier that you don't have to collect data about everything. You need to make good choices about what's most important. But also in planning your monitoring and evaluation, you don't have to necessarily collect data all the time. You can reduce the burden of it by, for example, creating a sample. So instead of trying to collect data from everyone, you take a representative sample from your client group and monitor and evaluate that and extrapolate to your wider benefits of your project. You can also take snapshots. So rather than, again, monitoring all the time, you can choose to take data, say, at the beginning, your baseline, and then 3 and 6 months. So again, it reduces the burden of data collection and makes it much more manageable. And then, again, can you streamline your data collection? So are there some natural milestones for data collection? Can you build them into your organisational systems? Again, if we think about that process of collecting baseline, you know, that's when you first engage with your client. So how can you build that data collection seamlessly into that first engagement and at your review points later on? So monitoring evaluation just feels like part of your systems and processes and not like an additional and potentially onerous activity that is additional to the day-to-day work where you're trying to make a difference to people. So that's kind of a crash course in monitoring and evaluation and how you plan for it. So when you get the slide deck, you will find at the end there's some additional resources there from NCVO and some example theories of change.
Hello.
So I hope you'll take a little bit of time to look at those and explore those a bit further, especially if you're not so familiar with monitoring and evaluation practice. So I just want to finish off for a few minutes talking about the journey that NCVO and the Seafarers charity has been on. So back in 2020, we were first invited to work with the Seafarers charity. They were undergoing, or what was then Seafarers UK. They wanted to re-evaluate the kind of strategy that they had. And alongside that thinking process that they were going through, they asked us to help them with developing a theory of change to support that strategy. And then in 2021, while what had become the Seafarers charity was busy thinking about how they would embed that strategy and work with their delivery partners, they invited us back again to help them think about monitoring and evaluation and what that might look like in terms of collaborating with their delivery partners on that. And that work continued into early 2022. And as part of that, the Seafarers charity did some research among its delivery partners. And also, we at NCVO, we ran some focus groups with delivery partners as well. And through that, we found some really great information. You know, we heard from many of you that you have really strong monitoring and evaluation practices in place, that some of you had a theory of change or were developing them. But we also heard that some delivery partners were, you know, at the beginning of that journey or not very confident with monitoring and evaluation. We also heard about the, you know, the many challenges you have. You're working with people you know, who are traveling, a global perspective, and trying to engage with people remotely, sometimes through other partners as well. So we heard that you had lots and lots of monitoring and evaluation challenges. So this highlighted the need for a flexible approach to monitoring and evaluation, rather than one that is very rigid and onerous. So this was a version of the theory of change that we created with the Seafarers charity. So we actually created a more detailed one, but this is a high-level one, a kind of model of change which aims to express the strategy which is now in place, which I hope you are familiar with. But the intended impact was identified as those who work or have worked at sea have less disadvantage and more opportunity at sea and on shore. And then there were these 5 really key strategic outcomes which were identified on the theory of change. So these outcomes are, you know, fundamentally important for the Seafarers charity in their strategy, but in achieving them, it wants to collaborate with you as delivery partners and relies on you to do that frontline delivery in order to make those outcomes possible. So the theory of change recognises that working in partnership, that it's giving funding and listening to you and the needs of seafarers to create targeted and solution focus support for them. It also recognises that need, that you need to be sustainable and effective organisations to deliver that, and so reiterates that commitment to covering some core costs as well. And then during that period, Seafarers UK, as it was then, was thinking about not just giving grants, but moving more into aspects of research and advocacy and influencing. So part of this high-level theory of change recognises that it's getting that information through working in partnership with delivery partners and informing its policy and advocacy work through that to create more evidence about the needs of seafarers and ultimately creating systemic change for them through working with the actors on their lives, whether they're maritime charities, influencing employers, or governments who have overall responsibility for those systems. So once we've developed that theory of change, we created a monitoring and evaluation framework, and I won't share it with you today. It touched on all aspects of that theory of change, but I just wanted to share some aspects with you. So here we've got 3 of the outcomes of those 5 strategic outcomes. Obviously, Seafarers Charity will want to understand about all those outcomes, but these are just some examples of the kind of indicators which we identified as potential ways of understanding if the Seafarers Charity, through delivery partners, was achieving those outcomes. So for enhanced financial stability, we thought that level of financial security for seafarers might be an indicator, and their level of confidence in managing their finances, their level of awareness about their financial rights. And also, if we're thinking about a qualitative measure, maybe how seafarers are actually talking about their financial future. And then for better working lives, we identified other indicators. So whether or not seafarers feel more connected to their family and friends, or whether or not they have more understanding about the terms of their contract, and so on, and some for safer working lives as well. And then we thought about the kind of activity indicators which Seafarers, the Seafarers charity might be interested in, and which you as a delivery partner might be supplying information around and collecting information around. And this is the kind of data, activity data, which many organisations already engage with. So in terms of user data, it would be the profile, you know, what kind of seafarer or family member is engaging with your services. For engagement, it might be things like how many people are using your services or the type of service that you're delivering. And then feedback maybe about whether the people who use services report that their needs were met and whether they felt satisfied with them. So as I said, that's just a snapshot of that monitoring and evaluation framework, which we worked on back in 2022. And lots has been going on at the Seafarers charity since then. So they've been on a journey, and Louise has joined recently, and I'm going to hand back to her, but because she's going to start talking about how the Seafarers charity has taken this work forward and is thinking about how it's going to implement new monitoring and evaluation and working with its delivery partners. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Jenny. Golly, quite a lot of detail there. And we're aware that there's quite a range of, you know, organisations and you're in different parts of your journey, but I'll reassure you again, we're starting at a simple level and working with you over time. So I'll go back to my presentation. Hold on. And okay, so what are we doing? So in the past, we had I'll see if I can get my face back. There we go. Not working, never mind. So in the past, we had a one-size-fits-all. Now we are going for a monitoring and evaluation process that relates to the strategic outcome that you applied under. So there'll be 5 kind of separate approaches. The questions will be directly related to a set of indicators that we've just been touched on, specific to that outcome. There's going to be a core of, of about 10 that are kind of similar across the group. Like, what does success look like for you? And we were thinking about this, and particularly in terms of enhanced financial resilience, because, are you as an organisation, if you are, making grants for hardship relief, is your goal to help more and more people? Is that what success looks like for you, reaching more seafarers in need? Or is it actually making sure that less and less seafarers need your services? So, sometimes you've got to think about success and what that looks like. What went well, we want to hear what went well. We want to hear what went badly, because that's where you learn the most. And were there any unspent funds, something really common. So another difference is we are going to start from 2024 grants, asking you to have a wee think about maybe 1 or 2 outcomes, 1 or 2 activity and outcome indicators that can provide a benchmark, because you can't measure anything at the end of the year if you don't know where you were at the start of that year. So we'll be asking you to have a think about that benchmark and how you might measure it, and so that at the end of the year you can compare. There'll be some grants that are very bespoke, have a bespoke approach to monitoring and evaluation, particularly the capacity building grants. For instance, we gave a grant last year to an organisation that wanted to implement Salesforce as a sort of groupware to improve their systems and processes supporting their frontline workers. Their frontline workers were spending more time on kind of double entry and fixing mistakes with their internal systems than out on the front line doing their support. So again, that's going to be not measured within 1 year, because there'll be an implementation process, and then maybe over 2 or 3 years we'll find an indicator that can just see where the dial's moving on that efficiency as an organisation. And then we're going to co-create this. So we're not going to, go, this is what we want. We want to talk to you and just go, what do you think? What do you think you can do? How are you going to measure that? And we're going to try and ask you for this information within the 12 months after your grant rather than 14 months, and just keep that in a nice tidy cycle. So that's it in a nutshell. This is very much a very sort of high level approach to our changes, but as you know, this is all really deeply linked to our new application process, which is recently gone live. So I've been working for the last 6 months with the team on a new application form that will have the capacity to collect the data that we need and actually, analyze it and monitor and report on the impact of our work. So the new application form went live, and I just wanted to touch on that before we finished and went into Q&A. So if you were making a grant before for the March impact meeting, you'll need your applications in roughly end of the 16th, sort of mid-February. That gives us enough time to kind of process everything and work out, any things we need to change in our new system. Before you start your application, please go to the website, how to apply, and there's a document, a grant making principles and overview document that will really give you a clear steer on what how to position your ask so that you've got a high level of success. We've created some step-by-step guidance that will take you through this. It's quite a different process than our last one. So, there's a step-by-step document, but that should help you get through the form. We've had a few successful applications so far, so I'm hopeful that it is pretty intuitive. We've got a new approach to due diligence. So and over the last 20 years, all I've heard from grantees is that they get really fed up with every time they make an application, they have to supply the financials and their, all that sort of due diligence documentation, which they probably sent to us last year. Obviously, financials need to be updated every year, but some policy documents don't, and some organisations apply to us several times a year. So we've been asking you to upload this information several times a year. So we've got a new approach. We're going to be asking less on the form and more directly, and we're going to ask you for it once and only to update that information when required. And hopefully the information will be stored in an area that we will eventually develop as an extranet, which means that you can log in, you can pop your new trustees list up there when it needs updating. You can pop your updated safeguarding policy up there when it needs updating. So that's where we're headed. That's probably a year or two away because we need to embed all this work first. But we're trying to reduce the burden on you as applicants. The due diligence is quite important, and we'd really love you to look at the Charity Governance Code regularly and make sure that you are doing your best as an organisation to adhere to that, particularly EDI guidance. Now, if you're not doing certain things, because, sometimes you're just a fundraiser way down the chain and you don't have a lot of, influence on the governance of your organisation. This is not going to affect whether you get a grant or not, but we like to see organisations working towards, operating more transparently, with more accountability and more legitimately. So, just keep your eye on the code and what best practice looks like for a modern not-for-profit organisation. Your applications are saved as you go, so you can log in and restart them or start again. And you can also go back to past applications and use the same copy if if things haven't changed much. And I usually say we're flying the plane, we're building the plane as we're flying it, but obviously we're building the boat as we're sailing it. And several people have already contacted with me with queries about the new form, and this seems a bit strange, and we really welcome all of your feedback. We're in it together, and I hope we'll be patient and we'll try to resolve any issues as soon as we can.